Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us this afternoon as we discuss the climate and opportunity investments in Governor Newsom's proposed state budget. We're pleased to have Spanish translation today. And at the bottom of your screen, you'll have an interpretation option if you would like to use the Spanish interpretation. I'd like to invite our interpreter, Leticia, to share how to access Spanish interpretation to our listeners. Thank you, Leticia. James, you can take the slide down now. My name is Andrea Ambrose. I'm our Deputy Secretary of External Affairs at the California Natural Resources Agency. We're pleased to have you join us today. We'd like to kick off our meeting, and I'd like to introduce our Senior Advisor for Climate in the Office of the Governor, Lauren Sanchez.
Thanks so much, Andrea, and buenas tardes a todos. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. As Andrea said, I'm Lauren Sanchez, the Governor's Senior Climate Advisor. I want to start by thanking Ana Mara Santos, our Cabinet Secretary, Jim DeBoo, our Chief of Staff, Keely Bossler, our Finance Director, and her whole team, and all of the secretaries you see represented on this call for their close partnership and for their vision on the Governor's Climate and Opportunity budget. I also want to thank each and every one of you for your tireless efforts and advocacy, and for directly engaging with us on our climate agenda. When I originally sat down with the governor to start crafting the climate budget, he was adamant that we needed to dramatically increase the scale and ambition of our efforts. I'm excited that today we're finally tackling the problem with the magnitude of investment and vision required. Today, the governor unveiled a $37 billion multi-year climate budget that builds on the state's historic climate leadership and last year's $15 billion package to do three key things: to protect Californians from the extreme effects of climate change, including wildfires, drought, and extreme heat, to lead the world in reducing carbon pollution, and to build more prosperous and sustainable communities for all. This budget embeds equity and economic opportunity across all of our climate investments, because we know that our climate agenda can and must deliver economic and social justice. This budget will deliver community resilience, affordable housing, expanded access to jobs and to education, while fundamentally changing how we power our economy. This budget articulates a future, a state that all Californians can see themselves in. We know that growing wildfires, worsening droughts, water shortages, and extreme heat are threatening everything we love about this state, and that those effects are not felt equally. This crisis spares no one, which is why we need an all-hands-on-deck approach to solve it. The budget truly manifests an all-of-government and an all-of-society approach to tackling the crisis, the defining challenge of our time. Today, the governor outlined a plan by which California can confront the climate crisis and simultaneously invest in building a more equitable and a more thriving future, especially for those communities that have been left out or have been left behind. This state has a proud history of leading disruptive global cultural, economic, and societal changes. For its next act, California will unleash a revolution of climate solutions. We know that our greatest risk is also our greatest opportunity. We know that ending today's polluting economy will create enormous wealth that can and must be shared by Californians. From educators to bus drivers, farmers to tribal and labor leaders, we will all help preserve the California dream. This budget will allow us to implement and accelerate our world-leading climate goals and be a model for how to integrate climate equity and opportunity. I want to share detail on the health piece of the climate budget, and let me start by thanking Dr. Ghali, our Secretary of Health and Human Services, for pushing through this budget to address climate like the public health crisis that it is. We know that climate change affects the health of every Californian today, but we know that some communities experience disproportionate public health impacts. The budget includes key investments to integrate and elevate health and equity into our climate agenda, the targeted focus on disadvantaged community. Funding includes $350 million to train 25,000 new community health workers, building off the Promadora model, and $35 million in investments for health resilience planning and health and disease monitoring due to climate change, and $30 million for real-time hyperlocal air toxics and climate neighborhood monitoring. There's a lot more in this budget to be excited about, and I feel a tremendous sense of solidarity to be joined by most of the governor's cabinet on this call and our fearless Department of Finance colleagues to share additional details. Taken together, this budget fundamentally gives me hope. Our path forward is unbounded, but our success together is essential. Thank you for your partnership and for your vision. I'm excited to work with each and every one of you this year as we fight for Californians. And with that, let me introduce my close partner in this effort, Natural Resources Secretary Wade Crowfoot.
Well, thanks so much, Lauren. I have to say the scale and breadth of this climate budget is remarkable. And when we think back to the beginning of California's work implementing AB 32, boy, almost over 15 years ago, we used to talk about programs being several $1 million or tens of millions of dollars. And now, thanks to the governor, thanks to you folks in the governor's office, we're talking about billions and tens of billions of dollars. So I'm going to run through three aspects of our climate budget: clean energy, wildfire resilience, and nature-based solutions. On clean energy, really excited with our collective progress moving towards 100% clean energy, but I think we all recognize accelerating climate change means we have to move further, faster towards 100% clean energy grid while maintaining the strength of that grid. To address that need, this budget deploys $2 billion of new funding proposed for future-proofing our grid while creating the clean energy jobs of tomorrow. The two biggest new programs proposed within that $2 billion are for building decarbonization and long-term energy storage. On building decarb, the governor's budget proposes a total of $962 million over 2 years for the Energy Commission and the Air Resources Board. I think it's safe to say this is probably the largest investment in building decarbonization in the country. About $622 million would be focused on a statewide low-income direct install building retrofit program to get building insulation, the replacement of fossil fuel appliances for electric appliances in low-income households, with a focus on spending this in communities that are particularly vulnerable to extreme heat. The other $300 million would be focused on consumer rebates that would be available across California to get more of these new appliances into our homes and to reduce the carbon output of our homes. That second major big new program, energy storage, focuses on the Energy Commission and proposing to provide the Energy Commission $380 million to promote long duration energy storage. This is an emerging technology that can hold a charge for over 8 hours and a really critical component of reaching that 100% clean energy grid. Other notable investments include almost $300 million to help food producers and industrial facilities save energy and reduce pollution through efficiency and renewable energy. $100 million to bring down the cost of hydrogen electrolyzers, which use renewable energy to change water into hydrogen, important for clean energy and storage. $45 million to stand up the offshore wind energy infrastructure development program, which is really making good on our agreement with the Biden-Harris administration to deploy offshore wind just as soon as we can off California's coast. About $240 million to enable an existing hydro pump storage project at the Oroville Dam actually work as it can to provide energy into the grid. Right now, it's not able to actually perform at that level. And so this provides an important environmental improvement that's actually enables the pump storage project to work as it should. And then lastly, and importantly, as we phase out oil, we're proposing $200 million to permanently and safely seal wells, oil wells that are no longer being used. These are wells that have no responsible party, so-called orphan wells. While our regulatory agencies are holding companies accountable for those wells that are sitting idle, there are a lot of orphan wells that we ultimately in state government need to safely seal to protect communities. And so we propose $200 million there. That's clean energy, $2 billion of proposal. Next, I'll talk about wildfire resilience. I won't go into just how challenging the catastrophic wildfire crisis is. We all know that. This last year, particularly brutal. But while the wildfire extremes are getting worse, our interventions are getting better. Consider these facts. Thanks to the dedication, the duty, the heroism of CAL FIRE and its partners, no civilian lives were lost as a result of wildfires in 2021. Amidst 8,000 fires burning 2.5 million acres, no lives lost. Also, we saw wildfire resilience efforts like strategic fuel breaks and prescribed fire actually help to protect the communities of Pollock Pines and South Lake Tahoe during the Caldor fire. So we're making progress amidst this challenging crisis, but we need to do more. The governor's budget proposes to strengthen wildfire response and resilience. On the response side, it proposes to spend $400 million on an ongoing basis to improve staffing at CAL FIRE to address the health and wellness of CAL FIRE firefighters who have been working exhaustively over these horrific wildfire seasons. It also proposes to spend almost $250 million on additional hand crews, so important during wildfire season, and technology and equipment, including new helicopters, new suppression technologies that are going to actually help with response. So about $650 million to strengthen our response. For wildfire resilience, that is proactive upfront actions, the governor proposes to spend an additional $1.2 billion over the next 2 years on these activities. That brings the 3-year total to $2.7 billion focused on everything from home hardening and community planning to protective fuel breaks around communities to landscape level forest health projects. Really excited with the wildfire resilience budget proposal. And then lastly, nature-based solutions. We know we can do more with our land management of natural and working lands, employing nature to address our climate crisis, but also to preserve our incredible natural environment and biodiversity. You may know that the governor set our 30 by 30 target to conserve 30% of California by 2030. And we've established a strategy in draft form, as well as a natural and working land strategy to really inform how those nature-based solutions take shape. So as we get your input to finalize those strategies, we are proposing new funding for nature-based solutions, including $150 million this year to accelerate agriculture nature-based solutions, which of course Secretary Ross is championing, as well as $400 million to coastal resilience, such as coastal wetland restoration. So it's really a remarkable set of investments that are driving our nature-based solutions forward, and we look forward to providing details in coming days. Next, I'd like to turn it over to my long-term colleague and friend, Secretary Jared Blumenfeld.
Thanks, Wade. Super appreciate that articulation. And want to particularly thank Lauren for your role in crafting this budget, which has really been outstanding, bringing people together from so many sectors of society. We've got literally 1,300 people on right now, many of whom for the first time have been brought into the climate discussion. And you've really, Lauren, helped foster this vision that's inclusive, intersectional, and transformative. Thing that I'd say just to kick this off, which Lauren and Wade, and you'll hear over and over again, this is the starting gun. This is a vision. It really does feel like a vision that embraces all of California, but we're going to need all of California in order to not only get it passed and funded, but implemented. So I think each one of you, I just want to start by thanking. You work tirelessly to advocate, sometimes for individual programs, and those individual programs some of them will be in here, some of them won't. We have a lot of work to do between now and May, but really just thank you for sticking with this, sticking with us. I think this vision is a winning vision, and I'm really excited to be part of it. And I think it really doubles down and shows the governor's commitment to addressing climate and equity. I want to start by talking about drought, something that Karen, Wade, and our agencies work on together. We're likely to have to address a third consecutive year of drought, and the budget builds on investments from last year's historic budget to ensure our residents, environment, and economy continue to thrive as we face climate-fueled extreme weather. Last year, the governor signed a budget for $5.2 billion over 3 years towards shoring up California's infrastructure and supporting our immediate drought response, as well as the state's long-term water resilience. This budget right now builds on that historic investment and provides $750 million more to address the drought challenges that have grown more acute with extended dry conditions that disproportionately impact disadvantaged communities. It outlines how we can provide immediate assistance to struggling communities and provide grants to local drinking water agencies facing loss of water, including communities that rely on private wells. We're continuing our investment in critical drinking water infrastructure to deliver clean, safe, and affordable drinking water statewide, because too many Californians still don't have reliable access to it. This year, we're going to invest in water conservation programs, groundwater recharge, fish and wildlife protection, and assisting small farmers whose needs have grown more acute through another extremely dry year. And above all, the budget makes investments aimed at preparing California to thrive despite the more severe climate-induced drought and flood extremes we expect to face in the future. And while we're doing everything possible to adapt to climate impacts, we're also doubling down on actions to reduce greenhouse gas pollution. California has always been the leader when it comes to tackling methane, a super pollutant, and our work in this area will help drive the circular economy and support farmers and ranchers as we work towards building our climate goals. But as you know, California's transportation sector is responsible for over 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions, and it's also a major cause of local air pollution that sickens all of us, but especially low-income communities across our state. So as a result, zero-emission vehicles are the largest single part of this climate budget, investing an additional $6.1 billion over 5 years, with a focus on communities the most impacted, bringing the total investment to $10 billion over 6 years to decarbonize California's most polluting sector and improve public health. California's already done a lot in the ZEV space, especially around incentivizing market development, and this new package builds on that good work. But there's an important emphasis. This package doubles down on our equity focus. This is evident in the emphasis on heavy duty, supporting low-income Californians to get ZEVs, locating charging infrastructure in disadvantaged communities, and community-based transportation equity projects that will create safer streets and cleaner air in the neighborhoods that need it most. The package includes $2.5 billion for zero-emission dredge trucks, transit buses and school buses, and other clean transportation programs, and more than $1 billion for charging and fueling infrastructure for heavy-duty vehicles. These investments include $400 million for port electrification, which will make a positive impact on the air pollution in fence-line communities like West Oakland and Barrio Logan. There's nearly $1 billion to locate charging infrastructure in low-income communities and $250 million to support low-income consumer purchases of ZEVs. But to be clear, if we really want to address equity and climate, getting more people into clean cars isn't the full answer. We need to increase mobility options, particularly in communities that bear the brunt of vehicle pollution. That's why the governor is proposing $400 million for community-based transportation equity projects in low-income communities, for projects like the ones that have rejuvenated walkable neighborhoods in South El Monte and connected neighborhoods by bike and transit to the waterfront of East Oakland. This ZEV package also advances another of our climate and equity priorities, getting off our reliance of petroleum. Oil extraction in the state is harming our communities, and it's destroying ecosystems in communities where that oil comes from in other countries. While we work to move away from this harmful industry, the ZEV package is an important way for us to reduce demand. Now it's my great pleasure and honor to turn it over to the Transportation Secretary, David Kim. David, you've been an incredible colleague over these last 2+ years. You've done a huge amount to move this agenda forward, and we will miss you dearly. So this is partly you guys hopefully giving a lot of love to David, as this is his last budget for this go round for this administration. Over to you, David.
Thank you so much, Jared. Really appreciate it. And I want to start by underscoring a really important point Jared just made. Yes to zero emission vehicles. That is absolutely a central part of the overall strategy to reduce GHGs. But beyond that, we've got to do a whole lot more to expand clean mobility options and reduce our dependence on driving. That is exactly what the governor's budget proposed to do. It includes a $9.1 billion transportation infrastructure package that aligns with our climate goals by reducing our dependence on driving. And it also positions us to compete for significant federal funding through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as IIJA. I want to touch upon a few things the governor's transportation proposal does. Number one, it advances statewide projects to improve rail and transit, including our electrified high-speed rail project in the Central Valley. It helps complete priority projects that seamlessly move people throughout the state, and it improves safety and access for bicyclists and pedestrians. These investments will create thousands of jobs, accelerate new investments to modernize existing transportation options, and support clean transportation projects that address climate change and equity. And I want to get into just a bit more detail. The governor's proposal calls for significant general fund and bond fund investments, including the following items: $750 million to advance active transportation projects that expand walking and biking networks and increase the safety and mobility of pedestrians and bicyclists, as well as address equity through projects that reconnect communities that have been harmed by transportation decisions of the past and prioritized the movement of cars over people. We will work closely with local and regional entities, and project site types could include conversion or capping of urban freeways to free up additional space for affordable housing. The governor's proposal also includes $4.2 billion in Prop 1A bond funds for high-speed rail in the Central Valley, and to move us closer to launching service between Merced and Bakersfield. There's also $3.25 billion for high priority transit and rail projects in Southern California and statewide. These projects will improve rail and transit connectivity between state and local or regional services and provide mobility options and reduce GHG emissions. And $400 million for climate adaptation projects that reduce risk to infrastructure from extreme weather events. Finally, I want to point out that the budget embraces the vision of the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or CAPTI, that we finalized this past July. This is a transformative framework for aligning transportation spending with our climate, public health, safety, and equity goals. The governor's budget funds transportation programs and projects that will help us meet these goals, as well as put us in a very strong position to compete for significant federal investment. And so with that, it's now my pleasure to pass the baton to our friend and colleague, Lourdes Castro Ramirez, Secretary of the Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency.
Lord is on mute.
Oh, okay, here we go. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, Secretary Kim. And I just wanted to echo the comments by my colleague, Jared Blumenfeld. Thank you for your amazing dedication and service to all Californians. We will miss you tremendously. I will specifically miss running into you in the hallways of our building. And best of luck to you. I'm so honored to be part of the Newsom administration and to be here with all of my colleagues, or most of my colleagues. And as you all heard from Lauren Sanchez, to be with all of you as we work together to build a future that everyone sees themselves in. Governor Newsom's California Comeback Plan, which was launched in 2021, provided an unprecedented level of investment with about $22 billion over 2 years to keep people stably housed and to expand affordable housing options. As Governor Newsom has said, housing is climate. So we intend to build on the momentum of last year by prioritizing and by bringing housing closer to jobs, closer to schools, hospitals, and banks. Housing that will reduce commute times, improve the health and well-being of all Californians, especially low-income households and communities of color. We know that the quality of a neighborhood and its connection to key community amenities is critically important. Where one lives matters. It impacts almost every dimension of a person's life, their health, their educational outcomes, food security, and economic opportunity. This is why the governor's budget invests $1 billion over 2 years to reduce the impact of climate change, to increase housing affordability, and to further housing options in areas that lead to stronger, more resilient, and sustainable communities. Through an additional $500 million investment in the Infill Infrastructure Grant Program, and with $300 million in the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Program, the state will fund local solutions to build sustainable and equitable downtown-oriented housing in communities large and small across the state. This includes also investing $100 million to convert excess state property to affordable housing. We will also be using existing streamlining tools and continuing to work very closely with local governments and communities to remove the barriers that get in the way of developing and producing more housing. With a proposal of $100 million and this governor's proposed $100 million infusion, we will leverage adaptive reuse practices that essentially will enable us to convert office buildings and retail space in neighborhoods into residential units. Collectively, the governor's budget doubles down on our climate, fair housing, and affordability goals. But it also, of course, continues our commitment to build more inclusive and sustainable places for people to live, to work, to learn, and to play. Our agency will continue to work steadfastly with state, local, and federal partners to align housing and climate goals. We remain committed to accelerating housing development through planning and funding affordable housing, and also homeownership options, and by continuing our focus on equity. I'm so honored to stand with my colleagues in this government-wide effort, and I stand ready to work with other agencies and departments on a range of initiatives that you'll hear more about today, from decarbonization to transportation and more, all to support the health and well-being of individuals and families across our state. Thank you again. Muchísimas gracias. Now, I'd like to turn this over to Chief Deputy Executive Director, Jessica Holmes of the State Board of Education.
Thank you, Secretary Castro Ramirez. Building on societal climate resilience requires coordinated help from all Californians, not just the adults. To that end, we are proposing a series of strategic investments to better integrate environmentally friendly strategies into our public school systems. These investments will also create more opportunities for our youngest Californians to engage in environmental sciences and become the climate heroes of the future. First, school bus fleets are dominated by diesel combustion vehicles. These buses create pollution that harms the environment and are costly to operate. To minimize the environmental impact of thousands of bus routes across the state, as Secretary Blumenthal mentioned, the budget includes $1.5 billion to support school transportation programs, with a focus on greening school bus fleets. Specifically, grants of at least $500,000 would be available to local educational agencies to replace diesel buses with electric buses and build electric charging infrastructure. Second, as our colleagues from the California Food and the California Food and Agriculture Department will discuss, we are excited that the budget includes an expansion of the California Farm to School program. To make sure that schools are equipped to take advantage of the opportunity to bring local fresh foods into schools, the budget includes $450 million to upgrade school kitchen infrastructure and equipment. These upgrades will allow schools to incorporate more scratch cooking and use of minimally processed California-grown foods into school meals. Further, a climate-focused economy will require a climate-educated workforce, and the budget includes investments to prepare the climate scientists, technicians, and policymakers of tomorrow. Specifically, the budget provides $1.5 billion to invest in college and career pathways for high school students, with an area of focus around climate-related fields. Additionally, the administration's fiscal plan for higher education is predicated on a series of compacts with the segments of public higher education, which include an enhanced focus on educational pathways, workforce pipelines, and degree production, and additional enrollment in the area of climate action. Finally, the future of climate resiliency will be driven by innovation, and we want California to be the home of that innovation. The budget includes $318 million for climate-related research and workforce development and training through our public higher education institutions. These investments will ensure that not only will the education sector do its part to support a coordinated societal focus on climate resiliency, but will also be the incubator of the important climate work to come. I'd like to turn the floor to Secretary Palugiai of the Labor and Workforce Development Agency.
Thank you, Jessica. Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Palugiai. I am the Secretary of the Labor Agency, and I'm really proud to be part of a statewide climate vision and budget proposal that recognizes both the importance of cross-agency investments and partnerships, as well as the important impacts that our climate work has on workers across the state. California's workers are going to meet the demands of industry innovation and new jobs resulting from our climate policies and investments. At the same time, as we move toward carbon neutrality, investments will be needed to support transitioning workers. The long-term Community Economic Resilience Fund included in last year's budget supports regional economic growth and transition needed after the economic downturn caused by COVID, highlighting key values of inclusivity, equity, and climate justice. This year, the governor's budget goes deeper with a focus on workers, both in the oil and gas sectors as well as in the goods movement sector. These investments will support training and the creation of new pathways to high-quality jobs in emerging industries created across our state's diverse regions. In addition to the high road investments made last year and proposed in this budget, there are 4 worker investments in the governor's budget that fall under the labor agency in support of transitioning workers. And I want to go through those quickly. The first one is $110 million over 3 years for a goods movement training campus at the Port of LA. This training campus will support workforce resilience in the face of supply chain disruptions and acceleration of the deployment of zero emission equipment and technologies in the San Pedro Bay. There is $50 million proposed to address the needs of oil and gas workers who are facing displacement from the workforce. This investment is designed to minimize disruptions to the livelihoods of impacted workers and their families and would provide broad support, such as funding for housing, groceries, utilities, childcare, and transitional employment strategies as well. In support of the $200 million investment proposed for the Natural Resources Agency around orphan wells that was discussed a little while ago, 15 million is proposed to develop a well-capping workforce training pilot program. The Workforce Development Board will lead this effort to retrain displaced workers from the oil and gas industries to fill these jobs. And as a last point, there is a 60 million over 3 years proposal to restart the California Workforce Development Board's grant program that supports workforce development programs and industries aligned with the California Air Resources Board Climate Change Scoping Plan. I look forward to working with all of my colleagues across the state government on these very, very important investments and initiatives in support of this amazing climate agenda. And with that said, I would like to pass the baton over to Dee Dee Myers of GoBiz.
Thank you, Secretary Palugiai. It's great to be here today and to be part of this conversation. I think it's very evident from the conversation that what's good for climate can also be good for the economy. And as both Natalie and Jessica and others have said, we have to, most climate progress will come through innovation, and that innovation will be driven by investments in workforce and by investments in research and by investments in our economy. And so that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. First, the budget proposal restores the temporary limitation on the use of net operating loss deductions and business tax credits, the R&D tax credit, first and foremost. And that happens a year earlier than previously planned. We also have a couple of new credits, including something called the Innovation Headquarters Credit, which is a new program for California headquarters companies investing in activities and technologies that mitigate climate change. It's a $250 million a year credit for 3 years that will be on top of the existing R&D credit. And again, specifically for California headquartered companies. There's another new program called the Green Energy Technologies Credit. It's a new credit for companies developing green energy, $100 million a year for 3 years. And it will fund pre-development costs for technologies such as electric vehicle manufacturing and infrastructure, geothermal, lithium extraction and battery manufacturing, long duration storage, processes to address methane emissions, and hydrogen technologies to reduce the use of natural gas. The credit will be awarded by a newly created board that will be developed collaboratively, but will live in the office of GoBiz, of the Office of Business and Economic Development. And it will include a warrant process by which the benefits of these advances and of profitable companies will help benefit all Californians. There's also some new developments in the Lithium Valley area. As you know, the lithium as a mineral is becoming increasingly critical as a resource both in the state and around the world. As we move toward a clean energy future to tackle our climate crisis, lithium is a critical component of batteries that are needed to power electric vehicles, enable a 100% clean electric grid, and move the state's homes and industries away from fossil fuel. It turns out that California has an abundant untapped lithium reserve, many actually, including in the geothermal brine that sits more than a mile underground near the Salton Sea. And so we want to help develop that and build out a world-class battery manufacturing ecosystem in conjunction, in tandem with lithium production and processing that would create economic opportunities in the region, in the Salton Sea region, and in Imperial County, deliver quality jobs and benefits, again, community benefits to the region. So through economic development incentives for the clean energy sector, the administration proposes this robust infrastructure that will provide incentives to advance the clean energy market in the state, help Californians, ensure Californians share in the benefit of these projects, and develop labor standards that will deliver, again, community benefits, economic development, and labor opportunities. It could become a model. This clean battery ecosystem can become a model in the clean energy sector that can guide state engagement in other opportunity areas such as offshore wind, with a focus on supporting California's clean energy goals, maintaining high environmental and labor standards, and engaging proactively with affected stakeholders and communities for real and lasting benefits across the state and for all Californians. So exciting opportunities for sure. And with that, I turn it over to Director Acefa of the Office of Planning and Research.
Thank you, Dee Dee. I want to echo what a historic day this is today regarding the governor's proposed climate budget. Historic, not just because of the dollar amount of the proposal, most importantly, because of the comprehensive and interconnected approach that the governor and leadership like Lauren have taken to address climate equity and creating access to opportunity to all Californians. This day is, I think, the reason I joined 3 months ago, joined the governor's cabinet. As someone who's lived and worked on land use policy issues, climate and equity in 5 cities, 4 countries, 3 continents, I have never experienced such a comprehensive and well thought out budget proposal. So I am, again, Sam Asaf, I'm the director of the Office of Planning and Research, the state's lead land use and planning agency and chair of the California Strategic Growth Council. I'll give a quick overview of the governor's budget that is focused specifically on community resilience, especially related to extreme heat. Resilience, to use the National Academy of Sciences definition, is the ability to prepare and plan for, absorb, recover from, and more successfully adapt to adverse events. Building resilience to climate change while making a just transition to carbon neutral economy requires significant investment in capacity at the local, regional, and state levels. The 2021 climate budget included a multi-year climate resilience package, including $819 million for community resilience. These investments align economic resilience with the state's climate goals, empower tribal and vulnerable communities, and support the leadership capacity of tribal, regional, and local governments and stakeholders. Of this amount, the 2022 budget includes $325 million for the second year of community resilience investments that are part of the historic agreement by the governor and legislature last year. These investments advance California's equity-driven climate agenda by investing in place-based initiatives, building community capacity, and making direct investment in implementation across the state. The Office of Planning and Research specific investments included in the package are the following: the Transformative Climate Communities Program and the Regional Climate Collaborative, it's a mouthful, Collaboratives Grant Program at the Strategic Growth Council, Climate Adaptation and Resilience Planning Grants through OPR, Regional Climate Resilience Planning and Implementation Grants, again through OPR, and the California Climate Action Corps at California Volunteers. Turning to the extreme heat package, every corner of the state will be impacted if it is not in years and decades to come by higher average temperatures and more frequent severe heat waves. The 2021 budget committed $800 million one-time general fund for over 3 years to address extreme heat. Of this amount, the 2022 budget includes approximately about $175 million to cool communities across California. This includes $100 million for urban and community forestry and urban greening at California Natural Resources Agency, $25 million for a new community resilience and heat program at OPR, $25 million for a new community resilience center program at Strategic Growth Council, and $25 million for the low-income weatherization program at the Department of Community Services and Development. Finally, the 2021 budget set aside included $300 million to support implementation of our updated extreme heat action plan. The draft plan was released earlier this morning. It outlines a strategic and comprehensive set of state actions to adapt and build resilience to extreme heat. This draft plan was developed through extensive public engagement in 2021. Most of the attendance here, I'm pretty sure, had significant input in that. In addition to input received through 10 regional workshops and numerous consultations with California and Native American tribes, the state held an extreme heat workshop series to gather recommendations on priority state actions. We are soliciting public feedback on the draft action plan through a workshop we scheduled on January 24th, which will inform the detailed budget proposal for this set aside later this spring. The administration looks forward to continued partnership with the legislature to finalize the heat aside package to implement the state's updated extreme heat action plan. So next, it's my pleasure to pass the mic now to my colleague, Secretary Ross of the Department of Food and Agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Asefe. It's a pleasure to be here with all my colleagues, and I too want to add my thanks and commend the entire team and especially our governor for his leadership and his vision with this budget. I'm very excited to do this work with all of you. The agricultural programs in the 22-23 budget represent a continuation of last year's incredible investments that were started. This 22-23 budget includes $417 million to provide critical support to farmers and ranchers as they continue to do their work towards helping the state accomplish its climate goals. And it's also about supporting California's young people in establishing lifelong healthy eating habits and experiential learning about agriculture, nutrition, and climate. Building off of last year's investments, starting with the $60 million that was put aside for the Farm to School program, this budget includes an additional one-time expenditure of $30 million for the Farm to School Incubator Grant Program and $3 million to establish an ongoing regional California Farm to School network. With these dollars, we will be able to increase the amount of school districts that are engaged in Farm to School programming, help to expand the adoption of best practices, create greater impact for our California schools and those communities of highest need, and create ongoing success for schools, farmers, and our environment. The funding will support food and agriculture education in classrooms and in cafeterias through opportunities in school gardens, on farms, and other culinary and agricultural pathways. We have seen it firsthand. Farm to School programs cultivate equity, nourish students, build climate resilience, and create scalable change for local and regional food systems. Very quickly, I want to highlight some of our nature-based solutions for climate. $85 million is for our Healthy Soils program for those practices that sequester carbon, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and improve soil health. $48 million is for the continuation of reducing methane emissions. Those are very potent greenhouse gas emissions, and doing this by employing very innovative manure management techniques on dairy and livestock operations. There's $25 million for the Climate Catalyst Fund, which will invest in critical infrastructure and those kinds of projects that will help agricultural producers address the impacts of climate change and be part of the solution. $22 million will help farmers and ranchers continue their environmental stewardship and ensure food security by developing and implementing on-farm agricultural conservation management plans that identify actions that they can take on their land to address climate change mitigation and adaptation. There's $15 million for the Pollinator Habitat Program to provide forage for our very important bees and other pollinators on working lands that will support biodiversity and nature-based solutions. And finally, there's $150 million for the very popular Farmer Program, which is overseen by the California Air Resources Board. This is a program that partners with farmers and ranchers to reduce criteria pollutants, reduce toxic air contaminants, and greenhouse gas emissions by replacing older farm vehicles and equipment. And with that, if we still have anyone left and they haven't gotten hungry listening to us talk about all of this great work that we're going to be doing together, hopefully you're as excited as I am, and I know you've got questions in the chat box, but I'm going to turn it over so we can try to do a few Q&A. Is that right, Andrea?
Yes, thank you so much, Secretary Ross. I am getting hungry just listening to the amazing investments in our farm to school program. And thank you to all of our secretaries for sharing the incredible work that they do day in and day out, and their teams for crafting this budget. I would be remiss if I didn't thank our Department of Finance colleagues who are also on the line with us and have worked tirelessly to get this budget in shape and shared with the public today. So thank you. I will borrow Sam's words in saying this day is why I joined this administration, and I am so incredibly proud to be working with all of you on this. But as Jared shared, this is very much the starting point. The governor highlighted in his press conference today, we expect changes until May, and we very much want to work with you on those changes and on crafting the budget that delivers climate, economic opportunity, and equity for all Californians. So thank you for your time, for your partnership, and we look forward to your questions. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you, Lauren. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. We invite you to enter into the chat Q&A any questions you may have, and we'll try to answer as many as we can before we wrap today. For any that we are unable to answer, we invite you to contact our respective agencies and colleagues for follow-up. We are also very pleased to invite you to join additional topical briefings later this week, where you can bring more of your questions. We're sharing those on the slide. Please go to our website to register and receive more information about the times for each of those. With that, we'll also share a fact sheet, which I'll put into the chat box, which you can also see on that same page. And we'll begin with some questions now. The first, and I will say we are still joined by many folks on the line. The first over to Secretary Crowfoot, particularly around wildfire resilience. There's a question around increasing firefighters' capacity and addressing new firefighting equipment for OES in the budget. There's a related question, Secretary Crowfoot, also around the opportunity for this budget to address wildfire resilience. Welcome your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks. So just to be specific, I talked about funding to expand or improve, continue to strengthen wildfire response and resilience. On the response side, about $650 million, $400 million of that is focused to CAL FIRE for funding personnel, specifically to address the health and wellness of the CAL FIRE force. CAL FIRE firefighters have been working exhaustively through recent catastrophic wildfire seasons, and this is intended to support them and to provide for their health and wellness. And then the $250 million is split between equipment costs and additional hand crews. And that funding for additional hand crews, about $80 million of ongoing costs would fund the permanent crews at the California Conservation Corps and the California National Guard to augment CAL FIRE in terms of fighting fires. So we're really excited about that. And then the resilience investments, the $1.2 billion, really the framework for that is our Wildfire Resilience Action Plan, as well as our shared stewardship agreement with the federal government. So we're excited about this proposal and look forward to it being leveraged and bringing more federal funding into wildfire resilience as well.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. Our next question is around flood risk and our drought response. A question we received is what investments are being made for reduction of flood risk? Secretary Blumenfeld, perhaps I'll turn it over to you.
Obviously, the complication with extreme weather faced by climate change is not just that we get one thing at one time. And often, you know, especially right now, we feel like we're in a good place because we've managed to get some rainfall. But as Wade, Karen, and I can tell you, the maps of the state show a lot of it still in extreme drought. Some communities are getting flood risk, and this package does many things in both those contexts. So the goal really is for DWR, the Department of Water Resources, and the State Water Control Board to work hand in hand with communities to provide funding across the board to small communities, whether that's a need, as has been done. Our two agencies working together have spent $92 million since April from the last round of money. And that goes to everything on the drinking water side, from providing new wells, lining wells, new storage facilities, and on flood risk, really helping communities, one, determine what that flood risk is, and then look at the different options for them to both mitigate it and, to the extent that they need it, to look into other options like insurance. So the money in the budget, the 750 million, really 250 million of that is set aside for small communities and for those kind of emergencies. And actually, to Lauren's point at the beginning of this call, the governor's office is really treating drought and many of these climate-related emergencies as emergencies. So we now have the Office of Emergency Services, OES, in all our drought calls every week, talking about what the risks are, from everything from flooding to the other extreme end, communities running out of water, and setting up contingency plans in real time to be able to affect them. So our goal is to have the money in place, which we do, to have the system in place between all the agencies and OES, and to be able to be prepared for anything from flooding, the erosion called, when we have atmospheric rivers, often that leads to soil erosion, and the impacts on downstream communities. Back to you, Lauren.
Thank you, Secretary Blumenfeld. We have a few questions around housing incentives and the investments that are made, particularly around affordable housing. Perhaps I'll pass that over to Secretary Castro Ramirez and other colleagues to join.
Great, thank you, Andrea. Yes, so as it relates to housing incentives, there is $1 billion in the housing package that the governor introduced. That includes $500 million for additional state tax credits. As we know, the state tax credit program is one of the primary vehicles to develop affordable housing. And we're excited, of course, that the partnership with the treasurer has been one that continues to enable us to focus on building more housing that is deeply affordable. So the $500 million will be added into that, those additional resources. Also, there's $100 million in funding for mobile home parks. Mobile home park communities across the state are critical places of living for many families. And so we are, of course, excited and looking forward to working with mobile home park residents and owners to upgrade the health and safety of these communities. And then I would say, in terms of incentives, the Housing and Community Development Department has introduced pro-housing designation that allows for communities that can demonstrate a commitment to producing more housing to be able to compete for state funding and receive additional dollars that enable them to be able to accelerate, right? Moving from planning to producing more units. But just as we're focused on incentives and providing more resources, we're also doubling down on housing accountability. And so our HCD department is working very closely to ensure that communities that are producing their regional housing plans that demonstrate the number of units that have to be produced, that those plans are actually plans in action, and that there is progress being made towards producing those units. And when progress is short or when there's not enough activity occurring, the department is prepared to move forward with taking appropriate action, including working closely with the Attorney General's office to ensure that units are being built. So we're very focused on working with communities, making sure that units are being built in the right areas, that they're well connected to transit, to jobs, to education, and providing the resources and the technical assistance But we also recognize that we have a housing crisis and a housing crisis and a climate crisis that needs to be addressed. And so we look forward to working together with our local partners and driving both incentives and accountability.
Thank you, Secretary. We have another question around agriculture, particularly the mention of investments for food producers and manufacturers and the intersection with clean energy as well as climate mitigation efforts. Secretary Ross, perhaps you can share a little more about opportunities for the agricultural community to engage in some of our efforts to combat the climate crisis.
Sure. So obviously generating on-farm renewable energy is something that is increased across our landscape on agricultural lands. This is happening, part of that is happening through our methane reduction programs for the generation of renewable electricity or low carbon fuel standard for transportation purposes. And that's been widely embraced by our dairy producers. But also the installation of solar has become a very important part of one of our drought programs, which is the on-farm water use efficiency program, which is about improving water use efficiency to continue our trend lines of less applied water, reducing greenhouse gas emissions by reducing our use of energy. And that solar deployment has been very popular within that particular program. Within Wade's agency at the California Energy Commission, they have had on-farm renewable energy generation, especially where it's pushing new technologies to see, will this really work? Can we really prove out a concept? As well as the food processor energy efficiency program. Our food processors don't operate at optimum level every day of the year. So being able to partner with them on some incentives that will be the best available technology to reduce energy use, to improve the movement of water, and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Many of the grants that were given several years ago actually proved to pay out for themselves. So these are the types of incentive programs happening early in the process, prove that we can make them the very wise business and economic investment that Dee Dee Myers talked about. And I don't know if Wade has more to add to that, because the Energy Commission has really helped us in the innovation space of really pushing new technologies, new investment to really stimulate the innovation of what can happen on our own properties when we really focus on that.
Yeah, I would just say the Energy Commission has a great track record in helping industry, improve its economic productivity and reduce its emissions. And so this funding, both for the food producers and broader industrial sector, I think is going to be helpful. And if passed as any precedent, is going to be really productive, supporting those businesses in the production processes, but then also reducing pollution and emissions. So we're excited about that.
Thank you, secretaries. We received a few other questions around some of the tax credits that were mentioned earlier, both in the governor's press conference as well as during this call, particularly the questions on, or the tax credits for businesses investing in new climate technologies. Dee Dee, could you help us answer maybe some additional info around those?
Sure. They're in process, so more details to come. But basically, there are, in addition to the restoration of the R&D tax credits, there are two new tax credit funds. One is $250 million over 3 years for industries in that for California headquartered companies that invest in climate mitigating products or processes. So that, again, will be on top of the R&D tax credit and will only be available to companies that have their headquarters here in California. So really wanting to make sure we support the ecosystem here in our state and that great process between our higher ed and our research, our workforce development, and our company. The other credit is also new. It's $100 million over 3 years. It's a green energy technology fund. And again, it's in process. It will provide tax credits, refundable tax credits, which makes it a kind of a unique program for companies that invest in a range of clean energy technologies. And it will include a warrant, which is to say that the tax credit will be totally forgivable if a company is not profitable. But if a company reaches a certain pre-agreed upon level of profit, then those tax credits will be paid back. That money will go into a fund to benefit Californians and future California companies. Details are still being developed, and we look forward to working with industry, with stakeholders across both the community and in business to develop exactly what that's going to look like and how it's going to work. But the idea is to create a process where Californians benefit, as well as the communities, as well as the industries, as we create new technologies here in our state.
Thank you, Dee Dee. We have another question around some of the investments toward community resilience and addressing extreme heat. Earlier today, we did release a plan on that, which is available on our website. But perhaps Director Acefa, you could touch on some of the investments, particularly for extreme heat and community resilience.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So the community, I laid out, so the specific investments. So there is a total of $800 million committed through the general fund. And the way that is broken down is about $100 million for urban and community forestry and urban greening through California Natural Resources Agency. About $25 million each in 3 buckets, one for the Community Resilience and Heat Program at OPR, another one for Community Resilience Centers. These are centers both in rural and urban areas for resiliency. And then the third part of the $25 million is for low-income weatherization program at the Department of Community Services and Development. Part of the sort of bigger outcome of this is a lot of these investments are interrelated, including the other climate-related investments. So I spoke about the community resiliency very specific to extreme heat, but please bear in mind that a significant part of this interconnected budget proposal is really resiliency around economic resiliency, resiliency around immediate threats from other disasters as well that are climate related. So in its totality, the investments are significantly more, but specific to extreme heat, those are the sort of the primary high level breakdowns of how the budget is allocated. Perhaps Wade might have, Secretary Crowfoot may have more additional information to provide.
Well, I would just, Sam, that's a great summary. I would just say we're really excited both to finalize the extreme heat action plan with a whole lot of input from many folks probably on this Zoom convening. And we're not waiting for that to actually spend money where we know it's going to protect vulnerable communities. So Sam mentioned some of the investments being made in this budget, and then this $300 million set aside, which is really focused on the priorities that come out of that finalized action plan. And as the A pages point out, that will be a proposal that we'll have later this spring for the legislature's consideration. So lots happening on extreme heat, and huge thanks to the legislative leadership like Luz Rivas and Henry Stern and others for driving this priority.
Thank you, Secretary and Director Acefa. One of our last questions is directed perhaps to the Labor Department. We had a few questions around the opportunities for this climate investment package to be supportive of economic opportunities in different communities and to build really economic resilience. Perhaps you can share a bit about that, and also invite our colleague Lauren Sanchez to maybe touch on some of the investments from our federal partners.
Great, thank you, Andrea. Hi, everyone again. Natalie Palugiai, Secretary for the Labor Agency. I do want to reiterate to everyone on the phone, there were some very large investments made in last year's budget around community resilience. So both within the Community Economic Resilience Fund, as well as through our California Workforce Board around high road training programs, which is about getting workers in partnership with community organizations, labor organizations, employers, academic institutions on pathways to high road jobs. And so the funding for those initiatives they are planned to be out in, grant solicitations between now and late spring. And so a lot of that investment is focused on economic opportunity and transition and resilience. There are other investments that fall under the labor agency. We have our call tomorrow, which are connected to resilience, particularly in the space of health and health outcomes and health jobs. And there are connections between climate and a lot of these other opportunities. So I really encourage everyone to join us tomorrow if they are interested in the broader package of investments within the labor agency in the worker development and employment space.
Thank you, Secretary. Perhaps Lauren, there was a question around investments from our federal partners, if you'd like to touch on that, given the question around economic opportunity and investment as well.
Sure, happy to, Andrea. And there was a question on kind of intersection with Build Back Better. So I think the governor and our whole team is really hoping that this transformative budget serves as a shot in the arm for all Americans that are hoping for climate investments out of the Build Back Better plan. Negotiations ongoing right now. When we partnered closely with our congressional leadership in Washington and also close partners in the White House, they were excited to hear, California really taking the lead on a lot of investments in communities through our budget proposal today. But of course, we do need federal support to tackle this crisis. So really excited to work with leadership in DC and communities across the state to make sure that we can really realize the climate safe future that we are all hoping for. Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you, Lauren. And as we're wrapping, I just wanted to again share some of the additional topical briefings that we'll have later on this week to answer some additional questions that you may have. Please again visit our website to see more information on the times and the registrations for all of those. Also available on that same page is a fact sheet, particularly around the climate investments, which I'll drop into the chat just now. And we very much welcome continued conversations with you all. Please invite colleagues and others that perhaps were unable to make it. We also will share a recording of this webinar on our website, on our YouTube channels, and in different spaces in our social media. So if you weren't able to have all of the other colleagues join today, please let them know that they can view a recording. And at last, I suppose I'll turn it over to the secretaries for any final remarks, and you, Lauren, as well.
Well, I'll just jump in and say huge thanks to the folks that have actually joined, and not in state government, but those that are on the ground driving all this across the state. We get to talk about this historic proposed investment, but this is really based on the work of you and your organizations across the state driving these priorities for so long. So really big thanks. And as Lauren said, this is the beginning of the budget process. And so if you care about items that we've reviewed here today, please do make your voice heard. Our legislature are wonderful partners in this and care about climate action just as much as the governor and we do. And it's going to be an exciting process over the next several months.
That seems like a good place to end.
Indeed,
Oh, there's Lauren. Sorry, Lauren, I didn't see you.
I was
No
eating
words.
some
Lauren, last
candy
word.
for an hour into.
Healthy eating. Come
Karen,
on,
we
Lauren,
need a
help
farm to
out.
work program. I need some, but we got to work on that for May. Just a huge amount of gratitude for all of you. Thank you so much. Stay safe and healthy. We'll see you in days to come. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.